Welcome to the Is It Time for a Lawyer podcast with attorney George Lamb. Each brief episode will focus on a specific legal topic to help you better understand the situation you're in and what your next steps might be. Let's join George for this episode. Okay, welcome back. We have attorney George Lamb in the office, and today we're going to talk about preparing your divorce mindset. George, welcome back. First of all, good to see you, guy.
Good to see you.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
You know, it's kind of funny when you look at it from a legal standpoint. Divorce filings tend to taper off toward the end of the year, and I think there's a natural reason for that. But then at the beginning of the year, they tend to ramp back up. Let's talk about that. Why does that happen?
Why does that happen? I think that the beginning of the year is the natural catalyst for divorce filings. I think it's just naturally time. And there's a lot of reasons. One would be, if you talk about the tail end of the year, as you brought up, you know, you have the holiday dynamic. And so unless there's some type of emergency, you don't generally see between Thanksgiving and Christmas a tremendous amount of these filings. A lot of it has to do with, I would say, you know, the holidays are generally not a time for that. But then you're seeing a bunch of extended family members. And so if you think about some of these family gatherings or friendsgivings, as you know, there's all sorts of, you know, we have this family's gathering, this person's Christmas, this person's Thanksgiving, this friend's this.
Festivus. Big
Festivus.
Deal.
And so whatever it is, you wouldn't want to have that necessarily voluntarily going on during that time. I think that it would generate a lot of questions that you may not want to experience. You may not want your spouse to experience. You certainly probably don't want your kids to have to experience.
Well, it creates a lot of drama too, right?
It does, and it depends. You know, we're all people, and so some people are into the drama, you know, especially with social media, et cetera. But, you know, some people probably are more private than others. And so, you know, quite frankly, I mean, we can talk in big words, but a lot of people just don't want people in their business. Yeah. And so in the holiday time, you have people in your business. And so I think that that's part of it. I think that as you go through just the natural calendar, as you're coming full circle, that's what's happening. You're concluding a year, you're beginning another year. So emotionally, I think that that's a trigger. I also think that, you know, you're emotionally ready at that point. I think a lot of people would say that people are kind of cooped up in the winter months. And so I think that as the time changes, generally people are like, the days are getting shorter. And then as you go into the end of December, that's like the shortest days of the year. And so I think inherently people are, okay, I'm going to be cooped up. I've got these months. I'm going to be here. I need to, it's time for a change.
If it was dysfunctional in the summertime, it's only going to be worse when you're forced to be in the same room.
You're kind of there. And so, and this kind of gets into, and we've touched on this in other episodes, is this a unilateral decision or is this a joint decision?
It makes a lot
of sense.
And
so, you know, if you're looking to move on, if you feel that you need to file for divorce, you probably want to get that going. If you're kind of agreeing that it's time to move on, then it's kind of back to the holiday and friend dynamic. You're kind of agreeing, okay, we're going to get through that, and then here we go. And so that's kind of why I think that it's just kind of a natural time for people that have had this on their mind to really commit to putting pen to paper and kind of moving forward.
Well, I've also heard you say, it's also coming down to what you referred to as the family fiscal calendar. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you look at, in business, a fiscal calendar the fiscal year can be whenever they decide that it is the fiscal year. But in life, we're kind of on the Greco-Roman calendar. And so what happens is that at the first of the, taxes are due in the first 4 months of the year. The tax year, which is your family's business, is the calendar year. School is on, if you have kids in school or even if you have kids in college, it's kind of based on the calendar year. And so when you start to think about, that's kind of how our lives are. Our lives are January through December. And so I think that naturally people say, okay, aside from the emotional part, if I need to get this going, I want to start now because this is the new year. And if I'm looking to, or we or I are looking to go through with this, then this would be the time to start. When you look at different things, I did mention taxes. We know that taxes are due. And so what happens is you're going to have to go through that as far as your tax liability for the previous year, which would be, so it'd be 2024. You'll be filing your 2024 taxes in 2025. And if you're trying to, you probably don't want to have to do that for the next year. If you can kind of get it done in the tax year that you're filing, that could be a reason why people file, in January in the beginning part of the year. If you own real estate, I'm not a real estate expert by any means, but I think that, it used to be, and it may be still true, that people list homes in the spring. And so if you're going to do that, I think that has to do a lot with the school year.
You in episode 3, we focused on divorce planning. And I think, if you got the benefit of time, if you know something's on the horizon and this is going to happen, this is part of the conversation, part of the topics that you might discuss with somebody who's thinking about a divorce but wants to actually start planning out what are the things I've got to think about. These are primary examples of those factors. Absolutely.
I think a big part of the family fiscal calendar, if that's what I'm going to call it, is it's right smack dab in the middle of the school year. And so what happens is that you're not at the end of school. You're not at the beginning of another school year. And so there's really no midpoint in school except for right after the holiday break. And so when you're talking about, and it really plays into that because you kind of need to know when you're going to separate into 2 homes where you're going to be because you need to be planning for your kids next school year.
Yeah.
And there's generally only one break.
Spring break.
Yeah, spring break. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just a natural time to really take a look at this if you're in this situation.
Well, from a mindset standpoint, in looking at the calendar again, there's also 2 big factors, right? There's finances and jobs. And how does that play into, especially here at the beginning of the year? I think that people always reflect at the beginning of the year. So when you talk about finances, I think that finances are always an issue in a divorce case. I've gone over this in previous episodes. You have one home being split into 2. Generally speaking, it's going to be the same income with double expenses. But what you do end up with, I think, in the beginning of the year, it depends on your employment situation, but generally speaking, promotions have happened likely before the first of the year. Layoffs have happened likely before the first of the year, if that's what's going on with your employment situation. If there are going to be relocations, we kind of talked about that with remote workers. If they're going to be, how is that impacted? And so when you talk about, your employment situation, I think that at the first of the year, you kind of know, where you stand going at least in the general long term, because you've made it through, I think, those seasons with respect to, how generally how the calendar can affect employment. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As we transition to the topics here, and again, we're talking about preparing your divorce mindset, having an understanding of the time that's going to be required. Let's discuss this. This does not happen quickly.
It doesn't. It's not fast food. It's not McDonald's. So there's certain things, it would be months, generally speaking, unless you have a situation where limited assets, no children, agreement. I mean, that can be done more quickly. If you have children, you have to be separated 60 days before a court will order a divorce, a dissolution of marriage. That's just one of the rules. There's a separation period there. or a waiting period, so to speak. But it also depends on the issues that you're trying to resolve. As far as like what your assets are, what your debts are, other considerations that we've addressed, parenting time, child support, spousal maintenance, division of retirements. I mean, there's a lot of issues, but it kind of depends on your specific issues that affect you and your family.
And it takes time to go through all those numbers, to kind of think through that, and then to actually reach some kind of agreement, or at least stake out your view and the other party's view.
Kind of goes back to the planning, goes back to the finances. You're going to know what your finances are. Hopefully you're going to know what your spouse's finances are. Sometimes you find that you don't.
Yeah.
And so you have to go through that period of it, basically due diligence. It's your own personal due diligence. And so, you'll have to file in court. There'll be a petition that's filed. There'll likely be a response that's filed. You may have to get somebody served. These things can take time. They have time limits. They have time limits to respond. Sometimes you should be able to get your spouse served. If you're estranged, that's a different story. That could take a little longer. You got to find them. You got to get them before the court. There'll be financial disclosures. There'll be financial disclosures that are exchanged, going to your point with regard to what the finances are. You kind of have to set the table to see how you're going to do it, and that can take time.
Well, I would think if your family situation is more complicated, for instance, you've got a family-owned business, or maybe there's somebody owns a business. I mean, all these other factors, how do you get that evaluated? How do you there's a lot of things that just take time to do, which could extend this timeline again. Again, that comes back to your mindset. Don't expect all of this to just automatically happen.
That's true. Some things aren't automatic. Some things can be relatively easy. Some things aren't. And so, at some point, what'll happen is that you'll likely end up at mediation, unless you can agree beforehand, unless there's some reason why you wouldn't be going to mediation. You'll be there.
In Jefferson County, that's kind of that's the natural path, right? There's a court-ordered mediation.
It is. If somebody moves for mediation, you're going to go. Some people just agree to go. And it can give you, number one, it can give you a chance to resolve your case, or at least some issues in your case, or get you to some point of stability. It kind of depends upon whether or not, one spouse is pushing it and the other person's reluctant, or if there's kind of an agreement that we need to push through this, but there may be some wrinkles that come up.
Well, the valuable thing to mediation is you have the maximum level of control in the situation versus just throwing it over the wall and say, okay, judge, you make a decision on our lives.
It is voluntary liability. Yeah. And so it is voluntary liability where you are either agreeing to do something or not agreeing to do something, as opposed to letting somebody else decide what your liabilities and responsibilities will be. That's a very good point. At some point, you can get to mediation relatively quickly. Sometimes you can agree to do it, as I said before. Maybe it takes a month, maybe a couple months to get to mediation. Maybe your case will be resolved. If not, you'd have to move for a trial date. That could be months out, and then you'd have to prepare for that.
And the court obviously is busy. They're not just waiting on your one case. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, so they've got to figure out a time where a judge can actually see you, hear from you. There's probably motions that the attorneys have to draft, all these things that have to go before the judge, even before you guys get to a hearing.
Depending on the issues, yes. Yeah. There will be motions that may or may not have to, that may have to be filed. There'll be trial compliance that you have to do. At some point, you'll get your day. Everybody wants to say, do I get my day in court? Yes, you can get your day. It may be one. It may be a half a day. It could be more than one day. And then you'd have to wait for a decision.
Right. That makes sense. And I guess ultimately one of the things that I've heard you stress when we talk about these topics is you don't want to be here January of the following year. I mean, if you think this is going to happen, might as well start.
I think that's true. I think that if you are contemplating divorce, I think that if you've thought about it, I think this is why people tend to do this at the beginning of the year. It may not exactly be January, but I think that what happens is that if people say, okay, this is going to be it, and then I agree with you. I don't think that if you're in this situation where it's just not getting better, it's just not going to work out for whatever reason, that you don't want to be, January of the next year looking up saying, oh, that was another year that went by. Because these things, as they go on, they become harder to untangle if they're tangled. And so, at some point when it's time to go, it's time to go.
That makes sense. Let's talk about this. A divorce in most cases, I would think, is going to be a pretty emotional situation. Whether you think you're ready for it or not, there's always going to be that emotional situation that you're going to have to work through and figure out. Having a support system sounds like a good idea.
It does. And I agree with that. People deal with these things in different ways. Some people tell anybody anything. Other people are close to the vest. What I would think is this. What I would think is that in order for you to get through this the best way possible, you would want to rely on your support system, be it close family members, be it close friends, maybe a professional, maybe a medical professional. But I would think
you're talking about a therapist, right?
I am, or a therapist or counselor. It kind of depends on what's going on with the individual. And you may need that support. But what I think is important is that you kind of keep that circle close. And these are people that, you're gonna trust them to help you get through the emotional part of this. And I think that you would want a small circle I think that would be the best course.
So you're saying Facebook therapy is not a good idea?
I don't think so.
Well, okay. So let's kind of wrap up the episode with this aspect of the overall mindset development here. The importance of working with your attorney, not against your attorney.
Right. And so I think that no question is too dumb. And I think that's very true. You might think, and it could be that it's a question that's bothering you and that it can be easily answered. And you'd be like, oh, I was right, or oh, I wasn't. And so you kind of want to make sure that you're lockstep with your attorney. And so, there's an adage, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's true. However, sometimes it's better to ask for permission rather than forgiveness. And so maybe you run it by your attorney to say, hey, how does this sound? Or I've done this. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but just don't do that anymore. Or let's not go that route. I don't think that that's going to get you where you want to be long term. And so I think that it's important to keep your attorney in the loop as you go. Just ask them.
Right.
Or ask your attorney, hey, what do you think about this? This happened. This came up. These are real-time issues that come up. These are real-time things that come up at any moment. And you don't necessarily know that it's coming, but that's part of the reason why you have an attorney in these situations, so they can help guide you.
Well, as we were preparing for this episode, you talked about, maybe your idea or your thought about how you're going to handle this makes sense, but there could also be some alternatives out there. And you, as an attorney who's got a lot of experience in Jefferson County and the surrounding out, you know how the judges are going to look at things. You know how the other side's going to look at things, actions you may want to take. So yeah, we could probably get there, but it might be, let's pivot a little bit and go this direction. We'll still get there.
I think that these cases are emotionally charged. And so when you're in the moment, you're going to maybe make a decision that is more emotional than tactical. Or maybe, if you step back, you might have a goal. And you may say, I want to do this right now because I want to satisfy this need, or I want to achieve this goal right now. However, that could go lockstep with a series of goals. And if you kind of map it out with your attorney as to how to best approach it to get more of your goals than just that one goal, I think it's a good idea.
Friends, episode 3, divorce planning. A lot of good tidbits in there. A lot of good tidbits. George, the one thing that I would think most attorneys would say is to be honest with me. If you're my client, be honest with me. I'm your attorney. There's attorney-client privilege here. I don't want to get surprised by something you either told me wasn't real and suddenly it is, or, hey, I didn't know. That's a bad way for your attorney to find out about something.
100% goes back to no question is too dumb. And so we're all people here. If you're thinking it and you're wondering about it and you're wondering, oh, this wasn't such a great idea, oh, maybe I should tell him or her, whatever it is, then you probably should.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Friends, this is, as George just said a few minutes ago, a divorce is a very emotionally charged process in many situations. Sometimes it's not, but for I would think the vast majority of people, it's emotionally charged. Being able to rely on an experienced family law attorney who has been down this road, who understands what's going to happen, who can act as that buffer to probably keep you from doing something you might regret later, because George is going to look at long-term ramifications versus just the short-term. Having that strategy mapped out ahead of time, if at all possible, is a great idea. But George, if somebody is in that situation, they're thinking, okay, you know what? It's kind of time to do the spring cleaning. How do they get in touch with you?
Easily. You could text me, 502-640-9797. You can email me at george@lambandlamb.com, or you can catch me on my website at lambandlamb.com. Easy access.
Outstanding. George, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. You're going to run off here in a few minutes and do some good work for some people. So once again, thanks for your time. And friends, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd encourage you, please do us the favor of sharing this out on your social media channel so that other people can learn about this podcast. We're taking complex legal issues and we're trying to break them down to where they're a lot more understandable, tidbits, bite-sized episodes that make sense, that are easier to understand, that may lead to additional questions that you may need to ask your attorney as you go along. But hopefully you found it insightful, and we'll be back in about 2 weeks with some more information. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Is It Time for a Lawyer podcast with attorney George Lamb. We hope you found the discussion informative and helpful. The comments George made are not meant to be legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship. However, if it is time for a lawyer, George is ready to listen. Be sure to share this episode on your social media. George will be back in 2 weeks with his next episode. Thanks again for listening.